Without further ado, please welcome Robert Bruce, all the way from Kansas City.
No, I'm not from Kansas City. He's making that up. I'm from Wichita, Kansas. No. Thanks. I have been in the industry a long time, and a love of music is what got me into the industry. I'm a frustrated musician. I own guitars, and I play with them, but I learned early on I could set up a system and make it sound really good. Today, there's so many varieties of ways that we can listen to music. The dominant one has become streaming. Great high-resolution digital, really cool. I have a high-res streamer and DAC and listen to high-res files and really enjoy them, and they're really good. And I use them more like the radio. My primary source of listening, if I get a chance to listen to music and sit down and enjoy music, it's always a record. I have a good turntable, but even a modest turntable provides such a wonderful insight into the music. And if the turntable, Tonearm, Cartridge, Phono, Preamp are set up right, I think that it's unequaled in today's world of the advancements that have occurred in turntable and record playback. The technology's 80 years old. We look at it and go, how did it even work? Who thought that we could put a needle in a record groove and spin the piece of, in early days it was shellac and now it's vinyl, and make these wiggles and create anything out of it? The advances we've had over the last 30 years or so, a lot of it is materials. We have things like carbon fiber in a tonearm. Years ago, no one would have ever used a material like that. Well, it wasn't available. You couldn't have used it. Different materials for the construction of the bass, the motor, the platter, the bearing assembly for the platter, the tonearm, the bearing of the tonearm, the phono cartridge. Those alone have made advances. And the difference is we're getting more music from the same records than we've ever been able to do before. We're going to play music in a little bit, and I brought a bunch of records. None of them are new. None of them are audiophile. They're all records that I've chosen because they mean something to me musically. And my collection, I have probably 3,000 or 3,500 records, but they're all records I like the music. I'm not a record collector, and I don't look on Discogs and things to find out, is it valuable? I keep track of things to go, wait, do I already own that record? Don't want to buy another copy, although I do have a few that...
copy might be better.
Well, and there are some occurrences where, a good example, Bruce Springsteen, Born to Run. The early issues of those, there were some mastering problems and some vinyl problems. And so I bought a copy of it in 1976 or whatever it was. And I have replaced it. And the newer one does sound better. And it's just, you know, mass-produced records weren't necessarily of the highest quality. They're getting better today. So that's a nice thing. We're seeing more virgin vinyl. I, though, tend to still look for bargains. The record stores in my area know me, and they know that I'm not going over to the brand new, like recently I found a copy of Steely Dan, Katy Lied. Popular record, and a lot of people make fun of Steely Dan. Well, they're wrong, but I found a copy in mint condition for like $8, and I bought that. Friend of mine bought the new $150 reissue. And I was just like, well, my system's better than his. Said, hey, bring it over. And he did. And we played them both. And the difference was negligible. And mine was, you know, I don't know, that copy was 40 years old or something. It was in good condition. So it was taken care of. It wasn't scratched and beat up. But I buy a lot of used records. I also buy new records. I won't tend towards the super expensive ones unless that's the only way it's available and I really want to have it. But the great thing about a modern, improved turntable is you'll get better sound even from the old records that you've owned for a long time. The other day I was doing a seminar and a fellow brought in some records he had just inherited. His aunt passed away and he brought in some old jazz and he goes, I know it'll probably be embarrassing if we put these on the system and play them. And he said, but this one, can you play this track? This was his aunt and uncle's favorite song. I was like, sure. So we put it on. And yeah, it was a little noisy, but it sounded really good. And he was like, how come it sounds better than I expected it to? And some of the reasons are the technology. What happens in a turntable, it's got some specific things it needs to accomplish. Number one, you have to have a base, a platform for the platter, the motor, the tonearm, that are as inert as possible, not picking up acoustic or mechanical energy, not adding anything to the signal. So start with the base, the plinth, we call it. And it has to be a material that is able to resist acoustic and mechanical energy getting into it. We use MDF for the most part. It has really good acoustic properties. Other manufacturers use other materials. One of the most important things about the bass, there should never be hollow spaces. The worst thing that you can do is have a frame and parts glued and screwed inside of it and plastic pieces and aluminum pieces and everything resonates. That'll get into the platter, get into the tonearm, get into the cartridge, and guess what? You don't hear as much music. So start with a good bass. We use feet to isolate the bass from the platform it's sitting on. If you put a turntable on a big, heavy piece of furniture, you should put it on an isolating platform. You can make one. You can buy a ready-made one. We make some. And the idea is the mass of the bass, the platform, is much lower than your big, heavy furniture. The big, heavy furniture is great. Can be real rigid and stable. That's an important thing too. But the big, heavy mass resonates at low frequency. That is transmitted into the turntable easier. So if we put a lightweight platform on top of that, well, that resonates at a much higher frequency, much easier for the turntable chassis and feet to damp and eliminate that vibration from getting into the turntable. After that's good, then we want a really good bearing, really good platter, really good motor and power supply. Those things maintain very accurate speed. We want the record to spin at exactly 33 1/3 or 45 RPM. Some cases, this one will actually even do 78, but take some other things to make 78 work well. But we even include a belt. You just have to put a cartridge that's made for a 78. When you do the platter right, you can use different materials. We use aluminum, MDF, acrylic, but our very best turntables machined aluminum because of the ability to really precision machine and balance and make sure the weight distribution is perfect. You want more weight at the perimeter of the platter than across it entirely. So some companies use acrylic and glass and other materials which are very well balanced, but the weight's evenly distributed. If you have more weight at the perimeter, speed accuracy, the momentum is actually better. So even in this guy, this is a turntable called the Debut Evo 2. The Debut series has been on the market. Oh, I just jumped into all this. So I'll go back to Pro-Ject just a little bit. Pro-Ject started in 1991. The founder is a fellow named Heinz Lichtenegger. Lives in just outside of Vienna, Misselbach, Austria. In 1991, CDs were by far the dominant format. Tons of records were still in distribution. People owned records. You could still buy them in record stores, and they were available. Turntables had evolved to a bunch of really crummy, cheap ones were available, or super expensive high-end. And he thought, this is crazy. We can make a good turntable that's reasonably priced. They brought out their first turntable, the Pro-Ject Model 1, 1991, $350. Huge success. Critics, everybody, every stereo store in Europe went, wow, this thing's amazing. It sounds great. So it took off, expanded around the world. About 2 years later, they developed the next turntable, a model up. A couple years later, another model up. Then decided there weren't any good phono preamps on the market that were affordable. So they created a phono preamp that was inexpensive, still made in Europe, sounded great. Again, it was successful. So today, 30 some years later, Pro-Ject makes turntables from about $400 to $15,000, all made in the Czech Republic in Pro-Ject's factory. And electronics from, $150 phono preamp to $2,000 phono preamp, CD players, streamers, DACs, an awesome, two awesome record cleaning machines, one of which is outside that you'll get to see in action later. But all of these devices are made by Pro-Ject in-house. Our competitors, even at the high end, very frequently might do design work and then have others make the parts and then assemble it and hope that the tolerances and the quality build that they specified were maintained. Being a vertically integrated manufacturer means your staff is there, you're making the tonearm, you're casting the platter and machining and measuring it, and that's why I get back to the debut series turntables have been on the market for 20 years. The largest selling specialty turntable in the world. That doesn't include Asian manufactured turntables that are really inexpensive. They're not specialty. But this has historically always been recognized as a great value. Over the years, it started out at $399, 20 some years ago. It's currently at $799. So it's gone up in price, but it's absolutely still a bargain. All of the elements I mentioned earlier that contribute to the turntable, motor, bearing, these are outstanding. Pro-Ject builds the motor in-house. Pro-Ject machines the bearing for the platter in-house. Machines this platter. This is aluminum, great weight distribution, but there is a damping ring that's in the perimeter, and it's a polymer material, and it adds mass around the perimeter, but also damps the aluminum so it doesn't ring. So that material was chosen, and that's an upgrade of this model versus its predecessor. This turntable features a carbon fiber one-piece tonearm. So from the bearing all the way on up to the end of the head shell, it's one piece. Lots of other manufacturers have great tonearms and have interesting engineering aspects. One of the most important things is the tonearm should not be able to flex or vibrate or have any problems with mechanical integrity. Behind it is the bearing that allows the arm to move perfectly horizontally and vertically only. The job of the tonearm is to hold the cartridge in place for the diamond to stay in the record groove. If there's any movement, if there's wobble, shake, a lot of turntables walk up to the tonearm. I did this recently to a $2,500 turntable. Walked up to the tonearm, you wiggle it a little, and it rattles. The tolerance of the bearing is not good. And so when the cartridge is trying to stay in the record groove. And if that can wobble, that means it's changing the contact of the diamond in the record groove. So really good tone arm and bearing. So this does all the fundamental things right. It's the starting point to me of where someone would get a turntable and would have the experience of really getting involved with music. Below this, you can make turntables that sound decent and they'll play the music. They won't have enough information drawn from the recording to make it involving enough. I could live with this. I have one of our $3,800 turntables. This is the point. If I were to go below this, I would, be disappointed playing records. But this, compared to a high-res stream or a really good CD player, transport and DAC or what have you, this is where, to me, the magic starts. Going up from there, you get more information, you get more music, and it's all refinements of the same principles. So this is technically 2 steps up from there. So $799. This is, it's gonna, I forget if it's $13.99 now. I think it is. But basically what happens is even better materials are used. This is still an MDF base. It's larger. It has fewer cutouts for the bearing and the motor and power supply. This has a different platter. This one's acrylic. The acrylic has some properties that are better than aluminum and some properties that are not as good. In this level of table, the decision from engineering was the acrylic was better than any other material in the same price range. If it were going to be a lot more expensive, then it actually goes back to aluminum. Our very top turntables, all of them use a precision machined aluminum platter, regardless of the price. And there are turntables that are $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 that use acrylic platters and some acrylic bases and things. Pro-Ject's engineers feel that that has its place, but not the very best performance. The highest level is actually an aluminum platter. This Tonearm also has carbon fiber, but it also has a layer of aluminum inside. It's a composite. There's some things about aluminum, typically a little heavier than carbon fiber, and has its own acoustic properties. The best is combining the two. So carbon fiber with aluminum. This Tonearm weighs more, which makes it suitable for different cartridges. The aluminum being heavier has more mass, means it will work with a moving coil cartridge or a lower compliance cartridge better than a lighter weight Tonearm. There is a system of matching of turntable, Tonearm, cartridge, and Phono preamp is the final step of record playback. And the Phono preamp that's built into most things is usually meant as a convenience. So rarely is there a Phono preamp built into an integrated amp, a preamp, a receiver that's super high quality. There are exceptions, but for the most part, and we'll compare in a little bit, this is, I don't even know how much this is. I think it's $2,500 or maybe $3,000, I'm not sure, this integrated amp. And it has a Phono preamp built in. This external Phono preamp sounds a lot better. And it's, the one incorporated here, again, is really more of a convenience. When they're going through the checklist saying, do we have 2 balanced inputs? Do we have 2 line inputs for CD? Do we have a line input for a streamer or DAC or what have you? Oh, we need to have Phono too. The Phono preamp built into these devices is generally pretty basic. sometimes a little integrated circuit, sometimes a basic phono preamp. Our external phono preamps are designed just for that purpose. We have a huge range. They go from $100 to $2,000. And the gain in each of those as you go up, Mario's kind of loud. The gain as you go up is simply in performance. The sound quality gets better. You do have a little more feature, but the features are really for matching. One of the things that a built-in phono preamp doesn't have is the ability to change characteristics that better match the phono cartridge you're using. There are a host of phono cartridges out there, different materials, different moving magnet, moving coil, different characteristics, and a better phono preamp gives you the ability, and we even publish a listing of, here are a whole bunch of phono cartridges, and here are the settings we recommend that will make the phono preamp sound better and match the characteristics of the cartridge as what we think is proper. There's always room for experimentation, and in one of the funny things about moving coil cartridges, people like to debate, oh, you should load the impedance higher or lower than the manufacturer suggests. We'll get a little bit more into that in a second, but the differences in the two types of cartridges, moving magnet and moving coil, and if anybody wants to see a moving coil cartridge, I've got a microscope and we can take a look at kind of the structure of it. It's really interesting. So the company I work for is actually called Fine Sounds America. We own Sumiko, and we make phono cartridges from about $119 up to $5,000. And we make both moving magnet and moving coil. And we're coming out with a new moving coil cartridge soon, so we've been finalizing the voicing, and it's been really cool. It's really a fun process to listen to different materials, and it's crazy how much of an impact little elements have. The shape of the diamond, the cut of the diamond, the material used in the cantilever, the material used in the coils and the magnets and the suspension, and even the body of the cartridge. But the two types, moving magnet, most common, we're actually going to listen to both turntables with moving magnet phono cartridges on here. When you get to a higher performance level, typically the cartridge would be a moving coil. All of the very best and most expensive are moving coil, but there are great moving magnet cartridges. Just because many really expensive cartridges are moving coil doesn't mean that moving magnet has no performance. It can sound exceptional. In an inexpensive cartridge, I would always pick a moving magnet. And by inexpensive, I mean under a few $100. If someone tries to build a moving coil really inexpensive, there would be too many compromises, and the performance would likely be inferior to a moving magnet. Talking about those two designs, the way it sounds is the way they are. We have a video out here that we'll look at when we're done, just so you can see an explosion of how a phono cartridge works. The design of a moving magnet cartridge is, we have a diamond tip, and that diamond tip, so the diamond tip is what comes in contact with the record groove, and that's what's tracing the valley, the walls of the record groove, moving around. That diamond tip moves an aluminum cantilever. Well, not always aluminum, sometimes boron, sometimes, well, there's a whole bunch of different materials, but it moves a little arm. Attached to that arm at the back of it is either a magnet, or two magnets or multiple magnets, or coils. Magnets weigh more, coils weigh less. In the cartridge body, the opposite device is there. In a moving magnet cartridge, Magnets are attached, or a magnet in some cases, attached to the cantilever. So the diamond moves the cantilever arm, the magnet at the back moves, that generates a pulse because there are coils situated right above the magnet. The magnet makes those coils pulse, creates an electrical signal that goes out to the phono preamp. In a moving coil cartridge, the opposite is true. Attached to the cantilever, the little arm that holds the diamond, at the back are coils. Those coils move in a magnetic field, and those coils are wired out to, in our case, the tonearm out to the phono preamp. But the advantage of a moving coil cartridge, if everything's implemented properly, there's less mass. Coils, smaller, lighter coils of, it's incredible to see. In Japan, our moving coils that Sumiko makes, they have 6 really old Japanese technicians who wind the coils by hand with super high power microscopes and sit there with a monitor and wind the coils and count each one and make sure they match each other exactly. And it's astonishing. It's artwork. People say, you know, how could you justify $5,000 for this little thing? Well, this one's not $5,000. This one's our cheapy moving coil, $500, our first one. But that little thing, you know, how could that be $5,000? And when you see the process of these artisans who wind the coils and build the assembly, it's an art. It's really remarkable to see. The advantages of moving coil, though, create an issue. Since there's less output, that means the phono preamp has a harder job to do. It has to amplify the signal more and preserve the fidelity of that signal coming in. The moving magnet having higher output actually creates less demands on the phono preamp. So typically, if a device, an integrated amp, or receiver, or preamp has a phono circuit built in, it will be basic and it will have pretty basic characteristics because it's easier for it to work with a moving magnet cartridge. But a moving magnet cartridge will still benefit. A better moving magnet cartridge, a better phono preamp, better matching still benefits. Just because you have a moving magnet doesn't mean you can ignore the quality of the phono stage being used behind it. A turntable, to me, is a system, and no one area should be way out of line with the others. You have the turntable. Next in importance is the tonearm. Finally, the cartridge, and then the phono preamp. And if all of those work well, then you'll get a great result into the system and get as much music as you can out. If you have weaknesses in any of those areas, you'll have limitations in the achievable performance. But I get calls all the time, oh, isn't the cartridge the most important thing? It's what moves. It's the opposite of a speaker. So it's a transducer. It takes that mechanical energy, creates an electrical signal out of it. Yep, that is true. It is the only transducer in the turntable playback system. But the limitation is if the turntable has speed issues, if it has acoustic or mechanical energy breakthrough getting into it, resonating, vibrating, if the motor, power supply, and platter don't have proper speed, if the tonearm does not have good integrity and it allows the cartridge to wobble, shake, vibrate, you cannot go back and improve those things and make the cartridge get more information off of the record. You can change the cartridge and change the sound. The cartridge, again, is a lot like a speaker in that they have different characteristics. I mentioned we've been developing a cartridge and listening to little changes and going, oh, wow, that changing the profile, the cut of the diamond is an audible change. So the cartridge is certainly important, but only if you get the other parts, turntable and tonearm, right. That allows the cartridge to do its job and do what it can do. Then comes the phono stage, and again, a lot of that is the matching. So a phono cartridge output is the lowest signal of anything we have in the audio chain for home use. It's much like a microphone. The output of a CD player or a streamer, 1 to 2 volts, something like that, and it needs no equalization. It just needs to be fed into an amplifier and level controlled and fed out to speakers. The output of a phono cartridge is equalized, very crazy, and it's all due to how the information is cut on record. So there's something called the Record Industry of America Association, RIAA. They decided on this curve that there should be a tonal response where the high frequencies are maintained very high, but low frequencies are reduced in level so that it would make it easier to press onto a record. So we need to equalize the opposite of that in the RIAA equalization of a phono preamp. So that's one thing it has to do. Then the other is it has to amplify the signal. The way that we've always transmitted the signal from a phono cartridge into a phono preamp has been over RCA cables. However, moving coil cartridges are balanced signal generators. They have a positive and negative for right channel, a positive and negative for left channel, and a ground. The body is ground. If we don't attach the ground to the signal, that's a balanced signal generator. So a moving coil cartridge is balanced, but most of the time what we do is we convert it to RCAs for single-ended operation because that's the way that everybody's done connection of turntable to phono preamp forever. There are some super high-end manufacturers, and if you have a $25,000 plus turntable or a $10,000 plus phono preamp, you probably have balanced capability in that. And using a super premium moving coil, in my mind, you should not connect any other way but balanced. So Pro-Ject was looking at that fact a few years ago, and since they already make turntables, tonearms, cartridges, phono preamps, they were like, let's explore how we can make a balance connection from our turntables to our phono preamps. One limit that occurs is a moving magnet cartridge typically cannot be connected balanced. Pro-Ject designed one that can. The reason they typically are not is because one channel, usually the right channel, the green pin, if you've ever looked at the back of a phono cartridge and it has a red, white, blue, and green pin on the back, the green pin usually is attached to the body. It's usually ground. That means that that could not be wired balanced. So Pro-Ject designed a moving magnet cartridge, this one is it, that is the first balanced capable moving magnet cartridge. There will be more. Sumiko has been working on one. We've put some effort into it, but not in the next year or two, but too many other things going on. But anyway, the advantage of connecting a phono cartridge to the phono preamp, balanced versus RCA single-ended, about 10 dB lower noise. The thing that people always ask me about is, well, yeah, records are cool, and they've had a resurgence, and kids pick them up and go, oh, these are cool, look at them. But high-res digital sounds better. And one of the reasons is, that's quoted, dynamic range. Digital can go from really quiet to really loud and not compress, portray that dynamic range. Balanced gives us 10 dB lower noise. So lowers the noise floor, improves dynamics. The audible results are bigger sound, more open. It's really and we'll hear the difference, playing the same turntable, same tonearm, same cartridge, only changing the connections from the turntable to, well, it's really the cartridge, to the Phono preamp. Pro-Ject has always made value an important part of their ethos. I mentioned the first turntable is $350. It was a benchmark. This one's still, one of the British reviewers just reviewed this one, came out in October, and said, best turntable on the market for $1,300. And in the design of the balanced configuration, Pro-Ject has turntables starting at about $1,100 that are balance capable, and Phono preamps that are starting at $500 that are balance capable. We're going to listen to a, well, this one's about $1,500, turntable arm cartridge. This is $800 for the Phono preamp. But the performance for the price is exceptional. This is also hooked up to play, and in fact, that one's hooked up to play through the Phono stage here. This is hooked up to play through the outboard Phono stage with both single-ended and balanced. So we'll start by doing some comparisons just in the connection of the turntable to the Phono preamp. Then we can play other things. But as I mentioned, the wonderful thing is this performance level is exceptionally good. As we go up, it just gets better, and we'll hear the difference in a moment of single-ended to balance connection. A few other things that I want to talk about. I've been a record collector for my whole life. There are a lot of different ways that you can handle things like cleaning the stylus, taking care of records. I always have a stylus cleaning brush near my turntable, and if I see a little fuzzball or anything, brush it off. Always go from the back forward. That is the same way the record grooves pass the stylus tip. Keeping the stylus clean is a really important thing. If you don't do anything else, the stylus drags through the record grooves, collects dirt and dust and debris. If you see a fuzzball, cue it up, wipe the fuzzball off. It's actually cleaning the records each time you play. So that's the first step. The next step is to use a carbon fiber brush. Brush the surface, reduces static, and we'll get surface dust and debris off of it. The ultimate step is wet cleaning, and it's wet cleaning with a vacuum, or there are some oscillating, I'm blanking on the name of ultrasonic, yeah, just like jewelry cleaners. And those are really good too, but they can have some issues. If the fluid used and the frequency of the ultrasonic vibration are not correct, they can actually do damage to vinyl. So there's question about, yep, they do a great job of cleaning, but does it preserve the quality of the records? I believe that the vacuum record cleaning machines that you'll get to see out here in a little bit do the best job. They don't harm the records. The way that they operate, you put some fluid on the surface of the record, brush it in. Ours is motorized. There are some manual ones too, but it's motorized. So you turn on the motor, use the brush to apply the fluid across the surface, swing a little vacuum arm over, or turn the rotation on again and turn on a vacuum. The vacuum vacuums up all of the surface dust, dirt, debris in the fluid, pulls it off, dries the record in the process because the vacuum just really pulls everything off. It's visual. You can see a dirty record, clean it and look at it, and there's nothing on the surface of it. Anybody who has a reasonable sized record collection, to me, it's a great investment. Our two machines are $550 and $799. The one that's $550 is just as good, but it's not as robust. The big one, we always sell to record stores or someone who's going to clean a whole bunch of records. The smaller one doesn't have the ability to dissipate the heat from the motor system and the vacuum as much. So we suggest 10 or 12 records cleaning at a time, and then take a break if you've got 25 or 50 you're going to clean. I have the little one because I rarely ever clean more than 5. I was in Minneapolis not too long ago, and I bought 8 records in a record store, and I clean even new records. And a lot of people ask about that why would you clean a new record? Because it's, brand new vinyl. Well, there are some things about that. There's something called mold release compound that they spray on the stamper that stamps the records. Some of that is in the record grooves. Sometimes little bits of the vinyl are embedded in the grooves as well. Used records, it goes without saying. I always, before I even play them, just take them out, clean them, put them in a sleeve. That's another thing that's, I think, an important part of, like I said, we're going to play some of my records that are 20, 30, 40, 50 years old that I've played on every turntable that I've ever owned. And I've had quite a few different turntables along the years, some pretty poor and some pretty good. The records still sound great today. Yes, I've cleaned them all, usually just once. When I vacuum clean them, they immediately go into a new inner sleeve in the jacket, in an outer sleeve. The outer sleeve is only to protect the jacket. The inner sleeve is to protect the record. If you take care of your records, it used to be people would say, oh yeah, they wear out. You play them 50 times or you play them 100 times and they wear out. They do wear. Today, though, the wear factor is better than ever. And it's things like the mechanical integrity of a turntable being able to hold the stylus tip in correct relationship to the record grooves better than we've ever been able to do it before. Another question related to that, people go, oh, my old records, if I buy a new good turntable, they're going to sound worse than ever because the good turntable is going to pick up all the dirt and debris and the old worn out record grooves. Well, not true. The same thing is kind of the integrity of the turntable, tonearm, and cartridge keeps the stylus in the record groove, and if there is some dirt and debris, it's much less affected. The other thing that's occurred over the last 20 years or so is extremely unique diamond profiles. So the diamond tip now on cartridges, it's like jewelry. High purity diamonds are chosen, and as you go into really expensive cartridges, they're chosen by the same people that choose diamonds for jewelry. Those diamonds, the important thing is the pressure that they undergo is intense, and cutting them to the right profile. Years ago, the only profile was a conical or a round, a very blunt shape. That went into the record grooves, didn't get in the grooves very deep, couldn't get into really fine variations in the walls of the record groove. Over time, that's developed, and we now have, and there's a representation in a video that we have out here that's really cool. We now have cuts that are so precise on the diamond that they present a very different profile. The sides of the diamond tip, it's cut multiple facets. To see one blown up, it's pretty wild to see the shape. It's cut in a fashion that the width of the record groove and the width of the element of the diamond, the sides of the diamond that touch the record groove, are closer than ever before. The thing that helps, it gets into the record groove, especially where there are really subtle, very high frequency, high dynamic grooves, and it actually rides in a different place in the groove than the old, more blunt, early conical or even early elliptical diamond profiles. So people take an old record, put it on a new turntable and are amazed that it actually sounds better. The performance is hindered only if the record is really beat up. I mean, if it's scratched and really, dirty, you can't do magic with that. But if it's in reasonable condition, then playing it on a good turntable sounds better. It does not sound worse. So that's one of the, to me, most fun things. I have records from the 50s up to brand new 2025 releases. And I want to play all of them. And I've played all of them on various things. And it's really fun to go, oh, yeah, this one I've had for 30 years. And I've played it many, many times and it still sounds awesome. So we'll pause for just a second. Who has questions or comments? I mean, I've just been rambling and I don't mean to, to go. Yes, sir.
So when you get an outboard preamp, how does that override the one in your system?
Well, you bypass the one. Instead of using the phono input, you would use a line input, an auxiliary, or something like that. Because the output of this is then more the equivalent of a CD player or a tuner or a streamer or something. So yeah, you would just not use. And I've had calls of, I got the new phono preamp and I plugged it in my system and it sounds terrible. It's distorted and noisy, and they plugged it into the phono input and they did the same thing twice. The phono preamp does its amplifying and equalizing, and then the phono circuit in the device tries to do the same thing, and it sounds terrible. It's like, no, unplug it, plug it into line in. Well, no, I want to plug it into the phono. No, you need to plug it into line 1, and remember that's where your turntable's plugged in. Yes, sir.
When you're using one of your balanced preamps like you talked about, does it make any difference if it's an RCA or a balanced input on the amplifier?
Yes, but a lot less. The most important part is getting the cartridge signal to the phono preamp balanced. So it is audible improvement, even if you don't have a balanced preamp or balanced integrated amp, for example. And yeah, great question, because that's another one that gets asked all the time of, well, my system's not balanced, so why should I do it? Well, because it's this incredibly small signal that's the most delicate, that if we get that to the phono preamp in the best way possible, even RCA outputs are great. And this converts the balanced signal to RCA for the output, and both are active. So, well, there's a couple more things. It has both inputs too, RCA input and balanced input, and then RCA and balanced output.
All of your balanced.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir. They have a memory too, which is really cool. So, I have one at home. My wife is intimidated by she calls it the good turntable, because I have a $2,000 cartridge on a $5,000 turntable, and so she's a little hesitant to use it. So we have a step down. Yeah, that's probably a good idea. Yeah, it's getting a little warm. Is anybody getting hot?
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's not just me breathing and talking too much. But yes, so the input has a memory, which is really cool. You could use RCA, and in my case, we have a moving magnet cartridge on a simpler turntable on the RCA input. That's because she's intimidated by the cartridge on our high-end turntable, because she knows if it gets damaged, it's a moving coil, it can't be repaired, can't be replaced, the Stylus can't be. So I would get a trade-in, we'll send it back to Japan. On a moving magnet, it's really simple. If she damages the Stylus we have a Sumiko Moonstone, one of our nice but moderately priced moving magnet cartridges. If that gets damaged, great, I unplug the Stylus, plug a new Stylus, we're right back in business. But that has completely different characteristics. So our phono preamps have a memory. So if we go to the RCA input, it can be set up 47 k ohms, a specific capacitance level, a specific gain level for that cartridge. When I switch to the XLR balanced inputs, it's set up for moving coil with different impedance, different capacitance, different gain. You don't have to know any of that. You just, once those are done, you just switch inputs. On the output side, both are active, RCA and balanced. You can simultaneously run two systems. So we have a lot of folks who have a distributed music system, have a Sonos or a Blue Sound or something that they play music to the house, and they want to play records in it. They can take the output here, feed it to that distributed audio system, then use the balanced output to feed to a local system, or vice versa. We have a lot of folks who want to have a turntable, but don't have a local dedicated system. They've only got a rack in the basement or in the closet or somewhere, and then they have speakers throughout the house and they want to listen. With the balanced output, you can run hundreds of feet without interference into a distributed audio system, much like PA systems and things, but that way you can utilize this in a number of different fashions. But yes, the big advantage is cartridge to phono preamp balanced, then a small advantage if you can also get balanced output to the system. So, okay, a couple more hands were going up.
I think I heard you say earlier that the preamp has to be matched to the
Turntable, arm, and cartridge, yeah, yep.
How do you do that?
Well, there are a couple ways. Ask for help.
Yeah.
One of the great things that you guys have here, and yeah, another thing you can make fun of Kansas City for, we have a hi-fi desert. We don't have a good shop. So this is a resource. This is a great, and them organizing this event is really cool. But you would say, hey, I've got this turntable, this cartridge, whatever your configuration is, what should I use? And they would say, oh, well, don't put a really expensive phono preamp with a modest turntable, or vice versa. And then the characteristics, some of the settings I mentioned, capacitance, resistance, gain, subsonic filtering, things like that. For all of our models, we have a chart of suggested settings for a huge range of phono cartridges. We have it available on our website. I always have it. Most of them I know, and so I get calls all the time. Hey, we're out in the field installing, a Pro-Ject X8 with a Blue Point number 3 and a Phono Box S3B. What should we set it at? And tell them what the optimum settings are. But that's one of the things that a outboard phono preamp does allow, is fine-tuning to match the characteristics to get the best results. Yeah, go ahead.
Are all preamps that adjustable?
No. Our inexpensive models have some adjustability. It's a little more limited, and the switches are on the bottom. So you turn it over, you look at the manual, go, okay, I think this is a good setting. Or if you look at our online library, you can find the settings and set them. A lot of manufacturers, and it's crazy to me, very expensive. I've been around $5,000, $10,000 phono preamps. To make adjustments for the cartridge, you have to open the case, go inside, find switches, sometimes solder the right resistor level onto the board, and it can be a really daunting process. The great thing here is it's very easy. Yes, you have tons of flexibility, but it's really easy to get to. And if you want to play with it and adjust it, I mentioned in moving coil cartridges, there are a lot of people that believe, oh, you should always have lower impedance than the manufacturer suggests for the cartridge, or you should have higher, and it's really easy to play with, and you can do it on the fly. While you're listening, you can say, and I did that with the new cartridge we're finishing development of. I spent a lot of time playing with it and finding the right match to make it sound best. There was no recommendation yet because it's a cartridge that's not quite out yet, and so I just had to experiment.
Sonically, what happens if you go lower than the manufacturer's recommendation or
Yeah, yeah. Not very much. It's a subtle change. You won't harm anything. And I've had a question just recently of, will I hurt it? Will I damage my system or my speakers or anything else? And no, you may go, ooh, this sounds weird. But typically, it'll change tonal balance a little bit. Capacitance on a moving magnet, you add more capacitance and it will sound duller. On a moving coil cartridge, as you change the impedance, lower impedance will often sound a little warmer, and as you increase the impedance, gets a little bit brighter, but no harm in making those changes, so won't hurt. Okay, let's see. Yeah.
Just a quick question about the moving magnet.
Yes.
You mentioned that if you sort of connect it in a balanced way, you would basically lower the noise, floor noise by 10 decibel, and that seems to be a tremendous benefit.
It is.
My question is, I mean, moving magnets have been around for quite some time. Why this hasn't been attempted? And second,
Oh, good question.
I have a Pro-Ject S2 myself that is not balanced. Can I retrofit something on it so that to make it balanced?
Yes, you can. It is balanced.
Oh.
Because even though it has two RCA jacks and a ground,
Okay.
the ground is totally isolated from the signal on both channels. And so, really interesting, here's a balanced cable. Here's what it has on this end, two RCAs and a ground, and that's what we're going to compare in just a second. On the other end, it has a miniature DIN with 5 pins. So it's positive and negative and ground for left, positive and negative and shared ground for right. So it's a balanced connection. Most turntable manufacturers, however, do not maintain the signal integrity from the ground. So they tie the ground to one channel, usually the right channel RCA. So there are a lot of turntables out there that are very fine, but could never be wired balanced. The Tonearm could internally be rewired maybe, but they were not. And the reason for that, two things. Phono cartridge, compatibility. When you don't ground the cartridge body, the signal to the body, there's a tendency for there to be noise. You can hear some buzz. So it just became the de facto standard years ago that moving magnets, always the body was ground to usually the right, almost 99%, right channel positive, the green pin. Same is true of turntables. Many of them, they don't want to keep the ground isolated because there's another potential for a problem if it's not grounded properly. So there are some very good turntables that have just two RCA outputs, don't even have a ground cable. Most turntables do have a separate ground from the RCA. And some can be wired balanced. That means you could put a balanced cartridge on them and connect them to one of our balanced Phono preamps. Has to be tested. You would need to measure that there's no continuity on the ground wire to either one of the RCA connectors. In the case of Pro-Ject's turntables in the last 20 years, as long as they don't have a Phono preamp built in, it's balance capable. So you plug two RCAs with the ground in on the turntable end, the balance connector on the Phono preamp end, and you have a balanced connection. But you would need a balanced moving magnet, the Pickett Pro B, or a moving coil cartridge. And on the X2B, I would suggest, or the X2, I'd suggest a moving coil. This one in particular, because they were kind of designed with each other. Your Tonearm and this cartridge were, and this comes in a high output and a low output, but if you're going to get a balanced Phono preamp, get the low output. Sounds better. The reason is how we make a moving coil cartridge high output, we wind more coils. We generate more voltage. When you wind more coils and attach those to the cantilever, it weighs more. So more restriction of the movement of the cantilever. So almost always a low output moving coil will sound better than a high output moving coil. So, yes, sir.
Dust covers, on or off?
Ooh, another good question. Always off. Now, that's the best way sonically. I leave mine on the turntable all the time, except when I'm playing it. And I just lift it off and set it to the side, kind of like I did with this one. This is the worst you can do. Put your record on, play it, close this. This thing's a resonator. Yep, you want it to keep the dust off and keep it looking nice and clean, but it's going to add interference to the sound. Next, better, at very least, lift it up. That's less directly coupled because at least it's on the hinges. It's not sitting on the plinth of the turntable, rattling into it. Best, though, take it off. It's also measurable. In Austria, they spent a lot of time because they even looked at different materials, damping the acrylic and damping the hinges and different ways to make the dust cover not impact the performance. And they're like, yeah, we can make it a little bit better, but still not as good as if you just take the dust cover off. So, good question. The other side of that is we do always include a dust cover on a turntable that has a conventional rectangular base. We make some odd looking turntables, the RPM series and some of our artist series and things that don't include a dust cover, but we make these huge, big acrylic, yeah, like a trophy case cover, trophy cover, and you put this big thing over the whole turntable when you're not using it. So, yes, sir.
I'm a relative newbie to all this stuff, so this is like
Good.
fire hose.
Yeah, I know.
Are there
And
any good websites or other places in general for absorbing this stuff in a
yeah, there are. And the funny thing is, I like the British press more than I like the American and stuff. Yeah, it's hard to learn. A great thing is you can come in and ask questions and look at turntables. You can research online. It's a rabbit hole, though. And the crazy thing is I see stuff all the time. I monitor Pro-Ject's Facebook presence and stuff, and I see comments, and I'm just like, where did you come up with this idea? It can't physically be supported what you're saying. And if it's really bad, if it's really bad, I jump in and I make a comment and go, no, that is not true. And here's a reference if you want to research. Yeah, come in, ask questions, look at some, get an idea for the difference. But really, a lot of it is, if you're starting out, do you have any records yet?
I have back to high school, so I've got a couple hundred.
Oh,
I have
cool.
I just got back in a cheap Sony turntable I got for Christmas a couple years ago.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you can step up. What's the rest of your system? Like an amp and speakers or?
I don't have a preamp. I've got an out-there receiver, clip speakers.
Okay. Yeah. So if you put something like this in, you'd be in great shape. And that would get you to the point of it's this level is the hook. It's the first, dose of cocaine or whatever you want to call it. You go, oh wow, yeah, records are really good. Yeah, I'm gonna start collecting more. And pretty soon you go, oh well, if it's this good, how would I make it even better? So it's good enough that
I need that, and I need a preamp, essentially.
Ideally, yes. You don't need an expensive preamp, and then you don't need a balanced one necessarily. But yeah, this guy with, say, our $150 preamp plugged into a line input on your receiver, and you would be, a world above. The other thing about an inexpensive turntable, people don't realize, it actually beats up the records. So I see it in record stores all the time, and I'm one of those guys that I'll talk to the people in the record store and go, are you asking them what the turntable is that they have? Because it's funny, to see people bring up 5, 6, 7, 10 new records and spend hundreds of dollars and then find out they're playing it on a $200 turntable, or, you know, oh, my cousin gave me his old Newmark DJ turntable, or, you know, something. And you go, well, okay, it'll play the records, but it harms the records. So you're losing value because you're beating up the records. A better turntable will take better care of the records and make them last longer, as well as sound better. So, yes, sir.
Yeah, what about with regards to placement of the Phono preamp
Mhm.
relative to power amplifier?
Yeah. Yep.
Cartridge?
Yeah. Much less an issue relative to a turntable, much more so any massive power. So if you have a big amplifier with a huge transformer and high current, then keep it away from that. The other thing to watch out is putting this close to anything digital, a surround processor, receiver, a DAC, things that have lots of digital stuff that's radiating inside the chassis. And the phono stage, because it's doing so much amplification, is more vulnerable than a line input from a CD or something. So yeah, you do. And I had a call just the other day from an installer who was putting in one of our turntables, our X8, about a $2,800 turntable, really good, and one of our phono preamps. He's like, man, this thing's noisy, it's buzzing. I was like, well, where is the phono preamp? Oh, I've got it sitting on the amplifier. I said, okay, just lift it up. He goes, oh, the noise is gone. Yeah, so find a better place. Just move it away from that massive power amp that was radiating so much noise. So, yes, sir.
Do you recommend to use weight on the top of vinyl?
It depends on the turntable, and yes and no. A warped record, a weight, or a clamp are essential. The weight of the puck is dependent on the turntable. On this one, we make a lighter weight, 180 gram weight that you can use on here, no problem. We make an 800 and a 1200 gram weight that will wear this bearing out really quickly because you're adding so much mass and so much more pressure onto the bearing. As this guy's spinning, it'll damage the bearing. So we suggest on our lesser turntables, either no puck or a lightweight puck or the clamp. And then as you go up the range, you can use a heavier puck. Our higher end models come with one. So if you spend, you know, $3,000+, it's going to have a puck, and it's the recommended one for the specific. But same thing I mentioned earlier, ask these guys, say, hey, I've got this turntable up. Don't put that big heavy one on there. Use a lighter one or a clamp. It sounds different. It's not always better. Mine comes with the 800 gram puck. I put it on, has a little more bass, changes the sound a little bit, makes a warped record much better, holds it better in contact with the surface of the platter, but the bass change it makes isn't always better. I typically play it without it, and then sometimes I put the puck on. So, but your mileage may vary, and you can experiment and try it. So, yes, sir.
I also have a high output and low output MC preference.
Okay.
How do we improve that noise floor for the low output MC?
Get a balanced connection. No, there are things that you can do. A really low capacitance cable between the turntable and the phono preamp that's well shielded will help to lower noise. Then low capacitance, yes. Phono cartridges are susceptible to higher capacitance. They'll make the signal sound dull. So a low capacitance phono cartridge doesn't mean expensive. The cable that comes with our turntables, although if you go up higher, you get an even better one. This is a pretty inexpensive Phono cable. It's like $69 or $65 if you bought it separately, but it's included in the box with many of our turntables, these two included. It is manufactured specifically, low capacitance, well shielded, good quality connectors, and it just does a great job with a phono signal. There are lots of other phono cables on the market. Some are crazy expensive, and they will improve the sound, but the difference in other areas to me is greater. So the cable choice should always be low capacitance, meant for a phono signal rather than CD or some other. The other thing is, we touched on the positioning. Play with where your phono preamp is. If you have hum on a low output moving coil or you get ground problems, things as simple as grounding the phono preamp to the rest of the system, like your integrated amp or preamp or whatever the phono preamp is attached to. So grounding the ground lug from the turntable position the same place over to your amp may help lower noise.
Or like power conditioner ground.
Well, a power conditioner can often induce problems with ground because they don't protect the ground. Oftentimes, the ground is disconnected. So you plug all your devices in and they have to put MOVs and capacitors, things that do the surge protection and regulation of power. Well, if they do positive, negative, and ground, that's 3 times as many parts. If they do positive and negative, that's 1/3 less parts. So oftentimes they don't do anything to the ground. They isolate it. When you plug it in, it doesn't connect to anything. So sometimes you can
use it that way. I thought maybe it would be a better ground, but
yeah.
I got noise.
Yeah. Yeah. So sometimes it's, and a good power conditioner, I think, is a good thing. Safety, regulation, that kind of thing. And that leads into power, which is an interesting upgrade option for almost every Pro-Ject product, our electronics and our turntables. We make outboard power supplies. All the devices come with a small DC power supply. You plug it into the wall, has a little cable, plugs into the back of the device. We make outboard power supplies that have a toroid transformer and discrete regulated outputs. Those then feed into the turntable and phono preamp. Dissociate the electrical coming from the wall and send a high quality isolated signal. Makes less of an improvement to the turntable, more of an improvement to the phono preamp. The turntable, one of the things Pro-Ject does across the whole line, the motors are AC. Made in-house, they're really good, the most accurate. Most companies use a DC motor, and the reason is they're afraid of AC on the wall. They don't want to have 120 volt 60 cycle or 110 volt 50 cycle as the reference for the turntable motor to spin to be accurate. Inside of our turntables, we feed DC in at 15 volts, convert the DC to AC, generate our own reference frequency for syncing the motor to. So it's not reliant on the wall. You feed 15 volts DC in, converts it inside to AC, and it drives the AC motor perfectly. Something we call speed box, and it's in this guy and all the way on up. Now, it's more sophisticated and more tightly regulated in our higher end models, but it does make a small difference still to add the outboard power supply to the turntable, but it makes a more audible difference to the phono preamp or to like our DAC or CD player or preamps, other things. So, okay, oh, no, go ahead.
Generally speaking, what's the life expectancy of a stylus or a cartridge?
Aha, another good one. There's a lot of controversy about that. Easy answer, 1,000 to 2,000 hours if you take care of it. And I've seen them go, I've looked under a microscope and seen stylus tips that looked awesome at, you know, many thousands of hours of playing time. And then I've seen some, we've gotten returned trade-in from a moving coil to a new moving coil cartridge, and look at them and go, what were they doing to this thing? It's usually either incorrect setup. If the cartridge isn't aligned properly and the stylus tip is sitting in the groove weird, it wears weird, and that sounds bad pretty quickly. Tough use, dropping it on the record every time, couple too many cocktails and, you know, and drop it or something. But really, if it's just wear, at very minimum, if the turntable is set up properly, 1,000 hours, very least, before you see much visible wear. It takes a lot. Different stylus profiles, that's one advantage of a higher performance cartridge and the way the diamond is cut. I was talking earlier about how many cuts, how many facets are on the diamond. The better ones, called a micro ridge or micro line, on the, if I were to say the cantilever of the diamond was, you know, this big, they have a teeny little line on each side that protrudes. That teeny little line that's precisely cut is thick but narrow. As it wears down, it does not change until that ridge wears all the way to the base of the diamond it was cut from. So it will maintain its performance for the life until it gets to the body of the diamond. In a lesser diamond, where you have more basic cuts, the wear profile happens more rapidly, because an elliptical, for example, where you've just got a couple cuts on the side and a cut in the front and the back, the wear impacts it a little sooner. But learn anything? Have any fun? Because you're welcome. You can tell I have a passion for it, and it's fun to share. So
you're an excellent presenter. Excellent. Thank
you. It's a topic I really hold dear, so it's easy to have fun.